All right. So I want us to continue. We're thinking about contemplative practice. And I want to continue, and I really appreciate the interaction we had last time, because this is such a broad subject that we can keep, by things you bring up, by things we point out, it's like, okay, this is what we're talking about. So someone asked me last time after class, came up to me and said, so is this the same as mindfulness? I'm like, yes. By another name, we're talking about mindfulness practice, right? Or contemplative prayer or contemplative practice. And you can choose, you can say, well, are we talking about centering prayer? Yes, we're talking about centering prayer. There's a lot of names for it. We're talking about meditation. Yes, we're talking about meditation, meditative practice, right? So we're talking about a lot of things. And I think it's helpful with the discussion as you bring up, well, hey, here's something I've encountered or something I've learned or heard. That's very helpful to broaden it, to make sure that we're not just talking about something specific. We're talking about a general approach to life that grounds us in a particular way. Okay, maybe that's one way to say it. It grounds us in a particular manner. So I want to take up this summary. I started this summary by James Finley about contemplative practice. And I like it because it's so broad that it doesn't try and restrict them. Because in the past, I was, read some stuff by Richard Rohr, and he talked about contemplative prayer, and I thought, I'm not a contemplative. And it's true, I'm not, in the sense in which he engages in it. The practice he has is not a practice that would ever fit me. And so sometimes we can get intimidated because we could listen to someone who's talking about centering prayer, and we're almost like, oh, I don't think I could manage that. And the good news is you don't have to manage that, right? You have to find a way of practice. And that's what I like about what I'm going to read through some more of what we started last week. But feel free, I'll try and stop at certain places. It's not extremely long, but I'll try and stop at certain places, and feel free to interrupt me and add something as well. So here's what we're reading. A contemplative practice is any act habitually entered into with your whole heart. So we said not half-hearted, not like a little bit, but you're really trying it to do it as a way of awakening, deepening, and sustaining a contemplative experience of the inherent holiness of the present moment. So the assumption is this moment is sacred. This moment is filled with the presence of God. This moment is a holy moment. Every moment is like that. And contemplative practice is to ground me in that understanding, so that then I find the peace and joy of knowing I'm resting in a very holy moment. It might also be, at the same time, a very trying moment, right? There may be things going on that make it difficult and make it worrisome, or, any number of things like that. But I can still be grounded and remember a bigger frame of reference, even if I'm caught up in something that is anxiety producing. Okay, so here you go. Your practice might be some form of meditation, such as sitting motionless in silence. We can talk about, if you're only familiar, I want to talk about, if you're only familiar with like verbal prayer. I said we all basically learn to pray by saying verbal prayers to God. I don't mean verbal, it has to come out of our mouth. We're thinking through words, we're talking to God. And that's great, that's good, that's where we start in prayer. But when we're talking contemplative practice, we're talking more about listening, which is why, and you might say, I have no idea, how do I listen in prayer? What am I expecting to hear? Okay, we'll get to that.
Your own breathing.
Yes, well, that's a good place to focus your listening, is the rhythm of your breathing, right? But we'll talk about that. But that's why these things are going to be mentioned. It's because it's something not where I'm talking to God, but I'm sitting and letting God speak to me. That's contemplative practice. So your practice might be some form of meditation. such as sitting motionless in silence, attentive and awake to the abyss-like nature of each breath, right? As you're just focusing on your breathing, you're sitting there, right? Attentive and awake to the abyss-like nature of each breath. Your practice might be simple, heartfelt prayer, slowly reading the scriptures, gardening, baking bread, writing or reading poetry, drawing or painting, or perhaps running or taking long, slow walks to no place in particular, right? See, I like the way he's opening up the aperture to contemplative practice. Don't think, well, it's just those people who sit and do an hour of prayer every day. No, there might be someone who bakes bread and then does other things, right? And in that baking of the bread, they find they are in a contemplative space. With what they're doing, it's connecting them to a deeper rhythm. That's what we're getting at, right? Your practice may be alone, really alone, without any addictive props or diversions. Usually you do have to kind of push away the noise some way. Yeah. Or your practice may be that of being with that person in whose presence you are called to a deeper place. So it doesn't have to be alone. The critical factor is not so much what the practice is in its externals, as the extent to which the practice incarnates. In other words, I think that choice of a word that applies to Jesus taking on human flesh, right? That's what we're incarnate. It makes real, makes fleshly, makes present something in a bodily way, in an immediate way. We're not talking, ethereal ideas, but it somehow takes form, right? So what matters is not what the practice is in its externals, as the extent to which the practice incarnates an utterly sincere stance of awakening and surrendering to the godly nature of the present moment. It's learning to live in the present, right? Some of you watched Ted Lasso. He had a great quip to his players. The present is a gift. That's why it's called a present. That was clever. Yeah. Clever writing. So it is a gift. The present is a gift, right? At any given time, we are likely to, now here, this is important. At any given time, we are likely to not have a single practice, but rather a constellation of practices, often with one of them as our primary practice, right? So you're thinking, if it's just baking bread, I only break bread every so often. So they're saying it can be all of these things. Maybe in gardening, you find kind of that connection to the immediate, the sense of the holiness, of the divinity of this moment and of yourself within it. But then there are perhaps times also of prayer and quietness, and there are times of walks. The thing is, you can have a bunch of different practices. You might have one that is kind of your primary, but you cobble together a number of ways in which you could be doing this, right? Others may surround it, other practices, each carrying its own special place in our life. As the months and years go by, the constellation changes. New practices emerge. Practices that have been present for years fall out of the picture. Right? You ever had that happen? I just used to do that and don't do that. And it was meaningful, but it's kind of, it no longer carries that meaning for me. And so I've let go of a practice that was very habitual, that I did a lot. And maybe I picked up something that is new, but this has started to ground me more, center me, let me know who I am, who God is, and how I can be at peace. We discover by experience that if we are faithful to our contemplative practices, our practices faithfully lead us in the direction of a more daily, abiding awareness of the divinity of the life we are living. The divinity of the life we are living. When Jesus talks, particularly in the, when I did that study over eternal life, it's like the phrase eternal life shows up, 3 times in Mark and, whatever, 4 times in Matthew, and 17 times in the book of John. It's like, whoa, John's onto something, right? And when John's in John in his gospel is talking about Jesus talking about eternal life. He's talking about, if I were the translator, I would translate it divine. Because eternal makes us think length of it. And you could have a lengthy life of misery. Of course, that's not what he's talking about. It's not the quantity of the life, it is the quality of it. And part of its quality is the quantity. It would not be that great if it were very, very short. I'm not saying it's not lengthy, but the primary meaning of eternal life is not how long it is the quality. It is the life of God himself that we are participating in, that we can participate in now, the divine life. And so some of us who've grown up in the kind of Christianity is like, we are sinners saved by grace, and sinners we will always be. And thank God, us miserable sinners will someday be saved. But you kind of, you stay at this mentality of we are wretched sinners. And you lose the fact that, yes, but Jesus came to save sinners and elevate them out of such a misery of daily life into a participation in his divine life that he shared with the Father here on earth, and that he now shares with us here on earth, right? That's what he's inviting us into. So I love the phrasing, abiding awareness of the divinity of the life we are living. I would suggest it's not that the life became divine as much as we awoke to its divineness. I'm more of the opinion that reality is not changing. I am blind and now I see. I was in darkness, but now there is light. And it appears for all the world that everything has changed. But that's only because from a subjective perspective, it seems like, well, something new has happened. Well, no, I have become aware of something old that I was unaware of. And so for me, it seems like it's new. Oh, God showed up. No, God has always been here. What you did was show up to an awareness of God. Yeah. You showed up for the first time and said, well, there's God here. My life is filled with the divine. It always has been. We just didn't, if you don't know it, for all practical purposes, it's not. If you don't know it, then for all practical purposes, it does not exist for you until you know it. But I think our process is one of, Jesus comes, he quotes Isaiah, I've come to, give sight to the blind, to set prisoners free. We're given sight to see what was always here we didn't know. We were set free to experience what was always here, but we had not the freedom to enjoy it. That's just my bias. Other people could say, no, things are changing. I tend to think, no, we're waking up to reality. We're all asleep. We're all in the dark. We wake up. Okay. Stopping there for additional thought. Yeah, John.
Just a thought from me. I've realized recently that my first experience with contemplative prayer, I think, was probably 50 years ago. I'd never heard the phrase, so I didn't know what was going on. But where I was going to church at the time, I got called in to see the elders one night, and it's like going to the principal's office. It wasn't good. They had some concerns, and I was told that I could no longer, at least for a period of time, I couldn't take any role in worship. I couldn't teach a class. I couldn't. The only thing I could do in church was attend and contribute.
I'll take your money.
But everything else was that. Well, I was in my early 20s. What I had learned, all of these things were what I considered to be serving God. That was my service to God. So if they're all taken away, what do I do? And that began to be my prayer. Was just sit down and pray, God, what do I do now? Well, that definitely came to mind. And that did happen not too long after, but I didn't hear any answers while I was sitting. But every day, it seemed like after that, things would happen and I would come across a situation where somebody needed some help. Somebody needed a visit. Somebody needed me to do something. And I found I was busier doing things that are, to me, became much more meaningful than anything I had been doing on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And so I think it was part of that wake up call of God is here and he has job, he has work for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Waking up to the present moment. Yeah, that's a great story. Because I think, yeah, if the other things that we've been doing are removed from us, it raises the question, well, where can I find meaning to, for doing something that connects with God? And so you were forced into position of finding that in new ways rather than in the
Not
standard.
my choice.
Yeah, but yeah, so that's and and I think that's very similar to kind of the thing we're talking about, right? It's in the quietness of asking the question, what can I do? Lo and behold, there were things to do. They just weren't of the kind of nature of what you had always thought. Well, this is what you do in church. You do these things. Maybe other things open up. Yeah. In some ways, that's how God is speaking, right? In the quietness of our asking the question, then open your eyes and see what is transpiring.
And I had to admit, those opportunities didn't just start.
Yeah.
They've been there before, I just didn't see.
Right. Yeah. Linda, yeah.
Yeah.
Look,
For me, the more I have practiced where, I mean, for a couple of years, well, really for about 3 years now, frequently during the day, and when I began to practice, it was more often, it was, I'm in you and you're in me. And so everywhere I went, if I was in my car, I was trying to make aware to my own self that God is in me and that I'm in him. And that he's right here. And it's intentional. I mean, it had to be sort of intentional. But the more I have done that, the more I'm aware that we as God's people are a divine presence in the world. And that makes all the difference. It makes the difference in how we serve, how we speak, and how we forgive. And that sprinkles salt and light everywhere. And I am so happy that God showed me that that mercy given.
yeah. Yeah. So we're observing sometimes we have to slow down. Again, it's going to be different for each person. Some of us are too slow already. Right? We're dealing with a different vibe. But for some of us, we have to slow down to notice what we have not noticed.
Yeah, slow down.
Yeah. For others, we have to become intentional about noticing what we've not been noticing. But yeah, so something like that. And what I like what I'm reading and what I'm trying to communicate is this: it has to be worked out individually. We can talk about there are certain things in common, but there's no one size fits all. I'm not recommending, oh, here's what a person needs to do. No, that would be foolish. It's as different as each one of us. So we have to each one find the kind of practices. Now we can talk generally about what that might include and some standard ones that are out there that can be helpful, but be brave and craft your own, right? Find your own place and way of being aware of God in the present moment. And there's an awareness of self and awareness of God go together, right? So St. Augustine said quite famously, one of his quotes is, I want to know two things, God and the soul. The soul, he meant himself. I want to know God and soul. He said, are those really two things? Or are they really intertwined? I mean, the reality is I can't separate my soul from God because the soul I am, the living soul, and I'm not talking about soul in the Platonic sense, some divine or eternal bit that I have to guard. I'm talking about soul in the Hebraic sense of Genesis. God breathed into Adam the breath of life, and he became a living soul, is the proper translation, is what the King James says, right? And they actually got that very right. It became a living soul. So in the Hebrew sense, we are living souls. And to know God and to know the soul is, you can't know God without knowing the soul, and you can't know the soul without knowing God, because I have my living, moving, and having my being, quoting now Paul, in him, right? So, so to come to understand myself is to come understand God better. Not that I'm God, but who I am truly is who God has made me to be. And I start seeing the direction and will of God in who I am. So self-knowledge lends itself to greater knowledge of God, and greater knowledge of God then leads to greater knowledge of self. And then you can throw in your brother and sister as well, right? So loving them is loving God, and what you do to the least. So, so it all get, one thing we don't want to do, and one thing that contemplative practice will help us do, is see that everything is a whole. It moves us to wholeness rather than to segmented thinking. Like, I'm me and that person is that person. Well, really? Or maybe what I do and what they do has an effect one to another. Does that make sense? This movement brings us more and more to seeing the reality of the interconnectedness of all things. So we move from this, doesn't matter, I just do what I want. And what you do matters, and it affects others, and what they do affects you. And you can't assume, it's just me. So that part of the movement, careful.
Yeah, I know I mentioned this to you before. And I've been sitting here thinking, do I say this or do I? I'm glad that there may be some that get it. My brother started his political text yesterday. And I woke up to that. I got the text before I even got out of bed. So I lay there. I'm like, John, I lay there and ask God, do I not respond? I knew responding to what he had said would be the wrong thing, just like a knee-jerk reaction. Do I just let it go and not respond at all? And what occurred to me was, brother's a spiritual person. And I sent the text back and said, well, we are called to pray for our leaders. That means even our past president. As we are to pray. And we're called to even ask for good things to come their way. And then it occurred to me exactly what you preached to them. And I told him, I said, you think I'm wrong. Because he actually said, I'm right, you're wrong.
Great text to send. I'll start doing that to everybody.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I said, you think I'm wrong. And I think I'm doing what's right. And we are also called not to judge one another. Because what you're doing for God. And what I'm doing. And that it all matters. I mean, God is our head. He will make a standard, or we choose to walk away. And he didn't never stop. But it stopped. And badgering me and pounding me over the
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
What's a comment?
Not follow.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say words that you brought up beginning, like mindfulness, meditation. So many of those things we all have personal experiences with words, and so all words carry baggage. And, you know, to your point is so much of it is getting past all the things that I think I know. And think I understand, because I have all these preconceived notions about what I think certain things are. You know, if you say centering prayer, I've got preconceived notions of what I think. I've got preconceived notions of, you know, somebody that rattles off the word mindfulness, you know, and things like that. But to your earlier point is that, you know, anchoring ourselves, and all those preconceived notions are not totally unfounded, because you can go through a lot of those experiences without being tethered to the reality of the divine in my living, move, and have my being. And so your 2 points of being grounded in the present moment and being grounded in the divine, I hear a lot of things differently and than I even did 2 years ago. And I'll hear them differently 2 years from now. But to me, so much of this conversation is, you can only hear things when you have ears to hear, when you're on the journey. Because I don't always, you know, I confess, I don't always have ears to hear what I need to hear. So,
Yeah. That's something else, and what Carolyn's saying and what we're talking about, something else that we're talking that what we're talking about will help us do is to separate from the immediacy of the moment and be able to step back and recognize in ourselves anxiety. I mean, Wesley's really good at this. He's helping me get better at this. Wesley is so in tune to his own anxiety and asking the question, I'm feeling a little anxious. I'm trying to figure out what that is. And he's made me start thinking more like, well, if I'm feeling a little anxious, I wonder what that is. And it's tied to something. And it's usually, you know, as if I got a text like that, oh, my anxiety would immediately go up. And rather than stepping back, I might do something out of my anxiety, right? That bothers me, that upsets me. And then I do something rash, I do something immediate. So this ability to know myself and to know God and the divine life that I am living gives me the ability to step back and to recognize, oh, now that has triggered some anxiety in me. Oh, and I know myself well enough to know, yeah, that's tapping into some old feelings and old thoughts, and it's raising those out. Or for me, it's tapping into old rejections. I've been rejected a lot, you know, and so every little new rejection just brings up a boatload of rejection. And the problem is, if I respond to it as if it's all the rejection I've ever experienced, that poor person who rejected me in a minor way is completely blown away by the level of my response to it. You know, but they don't know. Look, it's my parents, it's the church I grew up in, it's everyone who's, you know, it's the alma maters that won't ask me back. You know, it's all the rejection, folks. You just tap that, you poked a little hole in that dike and it'll flood came out. So see, that's self-knowledge, right? Contemplation brings us to where we start seeing those trends in ourselves. We step back, we recognize it, and we start seeing them in others, because then you start asking the question, what's my brother so anxious about that he's got to send me a text first thing in the morning to goad us into a dispute? What? Oh, maybe I take a moment to pray. You know, for his calmness today, because he doesn't seem calm, right? Right? You know, and I'm not being negative about him, but something like that is just thrown out there to be argumentative is not coming from a place of peace and rest and joy. And there's something disturbing this person, whether it's a family member or not. So that's you say, well, what's all this, you know, contemplative practice? It has practical benefits, very, very practical. It can give us a calmness as we live through our day. We still deal with all the junk that comes our way and anxious things and belligerent people and upsetting events, but we might be able to cope and live through those things a little bit differently if we've got some centered practice that we started perhaps our day with a little bit of somehow we centered. It's always good to start your day that way. As Gordon McWhorter used to say, and he was very honest about his own struggles, that he always woke up in the morning terrified. Oh no, I'm alive another day, right? He said, I had to start with prayer to try and make some sort of awareness with God, because if I didn't do that, I woke up in a terror. And his thing was, when you're asleep, you are consciously separated from God for those hours. And you have to renew that connection. So morning prayer is, some sort of morning practice is not a bad thing. Now, I'm not going to mandate it as an absolute, but at least some sort of morning practice that at least starts you off for just 5 minutes, that says, gotta remember, this is about God. This is about my life in God. You know, especially if you're a person who wakes up and the first thing that hits you is all the stuff of the day and all the stuff that needs to get done and hasn't gotten done, or all your worries, or that won't be conducive to working through the day well. All that tension, that confusion, that anxiety. Dave, you had something?
Yeah, I was thinking about, where does Jesus talk about prayer? I was thinking about our conversation Wednesday, where we talked about, running after what you're gonna eat, what you're gonna wear, like the things that cause that anxiousness, as opposed to seeking God. I wonder if another way of talking about is using the word seeking, because the things of God are hidden. It takes intentionality, and you never find it, right? You're 2 years ago, you thought it was this, and you know that right now what you're thinking 2 years from now it's going to be something. You're just in that mode of seeking all the time.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, that's a great question to ask. Where does Jesus talk about it? Because he certainly doesn't talk about, he doesn't use mindfulness or contemplative, but I think you're exactly right. When he contrasts the people, of the nations, what will I eat? What will I drink? What will I wear? And they're like running after all these things. But you seek the kingdom of God. I think Dave's exactly right. Is that not an invitation to a kind of centering practice? Where is the reign of God in all of this? I still have to wear stuff and eat stuff and drink stuff, but I have a frame of reference that first I'm seeking how God's reign is present now. Yet, is that Jesus inviting us into a contemplative practice? And I love your reference, and you were making this point Wednesday night. In fact, you're the one who brought it up about hidden things, the hiddenness of it all. God does not show up with a bullhorn most of the time. Say, well, what about Paul on the road to Damascus? I know, but did you hear what Jesus said? Isn't it hard for you to kick against the pricks? I don't think that was the first time Jesus had made the entree into Paul's life. It's like, how and Paul had successfully ignored it every other time, right? Yeah. In other words, he finally conceived. In fact, he says that later when he recounts this in Acts. It's like in 25, he says to Agrippa, and Agrippa, I was not disobedient to the vision. In other words, he chose to finally be obedient to the vision. So I don't think God shows up loud and grabbing your attention. That's why we kind of have to create a quiet place, a stillness, because he shows up. He's a humble, meek God. He doesn't ask us to be humble and meek because he's not. He asks us to be humble and meek because he is. And unless we push away all the loudness, all the clamor, you're not going to hear the one who just comes quietly. And we know the story of Elijah, right? He's not in the fire, he's not in the whirlwind, he's this small, still voice. That's telling us something. It's always been that way. It's a hiddenness, and if we don't seek it out, the radio's loud, the TV's loud, life is loud, and I'll never hear God, right? So I've got to create a space and listen. Okay.
But, just, Jesus is asked, how do we pray? Morning about
first, it's our Father who art in heaven, so first recognize God, that his reign, and then there, so I think that's where contemplation, start. But with Carolyn, folks that were here, because you mentioned Wesley and I mentioned Wesley, I think it sounds like that she did some contemplative prayer and then also sort of followed what Wesley's and the book that he wrote was Four Agreements. I don't remember who the author, you remember the author?
I don't remember.
But it's the Four Agreements. And Carolyn, I think, followed that. Be impeccable with your words. Be loving and truthful. Don't take anything personally. You need to love your enemies. 3, don't make assumptions. And 4, always do your best or be loving. And I think the way he responded wasn't, that's why he didn't respond. Because he just went with love and family. Politically, those are probably the hardest.
Yeah.
Of all the things that you can deal with. Just,
Yeah.
You know, I do think, and I had this discussion with you know, I go back to 6-10 years ago where the DF email I thought was so I participate stupidly in some of that political work. And I'm so thankful now. It's really just, hey, pray for this, or you know, I've got something to give my people. You know, come to this. I think we've all got to contemplate about.
You know, you tied self-knowledge to God, I think. So I think there's a direct chain, because the more I know about myself, the more I find that I see my faults, and there's less of me, like more humility comes out. And then towards that thing, you know, more of God and less of me.
Yeah, I mentioned this statement before, which I really like. I don't remember the lady who said it. I don't remember the lady who said it, but God shows up disguised as your own life. I think that's a true statement. God shows up disguised as your own life. In other words, the experiences, what's going on in your life, that's where God is showing up to you, and not in someone else's life, obviously, in your life. God is showing up to you disguised, hidden, not always apparent, as your life, right? So yeah, the self-knowledge is not a narcissistic sort of endeavor, like, oh, I'm going to be all about myself. No, the self-knowledge is, where is God coming except within my own life? That's where he's coming to me, in the life he's granted me, and that he's continuing to participate and be present in. So that looking into myself, that inwardness, opens that up. Something else that was said that made me think of where Jesus is talking about prayer, and I guess this is what Helen was saying. He started with the Lord's Prayer. Jesus said about prayer, before he gives that, he says, well, when you pray, enter into your closet. The interesting thing is, right, it doesn't say closet. The Jews didn't have closets in their houses. So what was the word? The word was inner room. Interestingly enough, the Jews really didn't have inner rooms in their houses. So is Jesus being ridiculous when he says to people, enter into your inner room? There's no way they thought, oh yeah, when I go home, I'll make a prayer space in that central room in my house. They did not think literally. They knew he wasn't talking about some physical location in their house. When he said, enter into the inner room, he was obviously talking about into oneself. Go deep within and pray there. Right? So, and what does he criticize? People who babble on with lots of words, thinking God will hear them because of all they say. And people who pray in the marketplace, so they'll be seen. And he says, you enter into your inner space, into your inner self. And there you commune with God. That's Jesus talking about contemplative prayer. More so than saying a bunch of words, entering into the innermost part of you. Your house is you. right? So sometimes we miss that because it was translated closet, because it was translated as a small room, right? That's, it means go within your own soul, go deep within yourself and pray there. Certainly not out where people can see, externally praying for others, for others to notice, go inwardly and pray there, and there you will be blessed. Okay, Jim?
It kind of goes to what you're saying right now into the inner room at us, but also what you said earlier, where it really has to start with quiet. You can take it both where it's you can be there when it's loud, but at least for me, it doesn't start there. The ability to do that doesn't start by doing it in a loud place, and it's very short. Best of any song is bird song in the quiet. But first you must have quiet. And it's, you can't really hear that song, that bird song. You can't hear the God speaking to you. You can't hear the beauty unless you find the quiet.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and where does Jesus do this? Right?
Silence and silence.
Yeah, Jesus, you notice he operates in three realms in his own ministry. He operates with the crowds. It ain't quiet there, right? He operates with his disciples, the small group. And then he's continually going off on his own to pray. To the mountain. The disciples are in the boat, but he goes to the mountain to pray, right? He does that. And to Jim's point is, you got to start in the silence so you can have something to bring. How does he stay grounded when the crowds are there and the Pharisees are trying to find fault and get him in trouble, and the people are begging for healing, and everyone's touching him, and that's chaos. How does he maintain his sanity? It's because he went away and prayed on the mountain too, right? So if we don't do that same pattern, we're not going to be better than Jesus. I'm not going to be able to operate in the crowds and the chaos and the tumult of life if I'm not also going away, even sometimes from the companions who are on the same journey, but getting away where it's just me and God, right? And that's that pattern, is it has to start there so that then you can enter into the crowd and not lose your mind, right? But then you retreat again, and sometimes Jesus is like, and he went away, and he sent the crowds away, and he went away, he went off by himself for a little while because he needed to reconnect. So we see Jesus practicing this kind of center. I would call that centering prayer. That's Jesus being mindful. Pick your phrase. That's Jesus doing contemplative practice or contemplative prayer. He's going away to find silence and solitude, to hear his Father again, to give him perspective when he had to enter back into all that's going on in the world. Right? We don't go there and live there and shun the world. We were called to go into the world. Okay. All right. Well, we'll stop there. And thank you for all great comments and thoughts. And we're going to have a meal. So if you can stay for the meal, please do.